Today's episode of the Our Hen House podcast is being sponsored by our partner, A Well-Fed World. A Well-Fed World is a hunger relief and animal protection organization chipping away at two of the world's most immense, unnecessary, and unconscionable forms of suffering. The suffering of people hungry from lack of food, and the suffering of animals used and abused for food. Mending our unjust food system is a critical part of solving the world's most destructive and persistent problems. Fortunately, the plant-based foods that promote health and well-being are the same foods that conserve resources to better feed the world, while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting the environment. A well-fed world provides the means for change by empowering individuals, social justice organizations, and political decision-makers to embrace the benefits of plant-based foods and farming. Learn more at awfw.org.
Our hen house is a squawking house. Our hen house is their hen house. Our hen house, ooh, it's a funky fresh house. Our hen house is your hen house.
Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Mariann Sullivan. We have another great show for you this week. My guest is Persis Eskander, and she is someone who is thinking about animals, particularly wild animals, in some ways that are really new to me. She's the executive director of the Wild Animal Suffering Research Project, and I think you're going to find her interview really fascinating. And then Jasmine will be speaking once again with Nora Kramer, and you're really going to want to hear what she's is going to be talking about with Jasmine. Nora's the founder and director of the Youth Empowered Action Yay Camp, which you've probably heard of. She's been on the podcast before talking about it. And it's a social justice leadership camp, and it serves all vegan food, and it's in its 10th year, training youth activists how to make a bigger difference in the world. And she's been an activist in a whole bunch of different social justice causes, but really focusing on animal rights and factory farming for at least 15 years. And this year, this is the really exciting news, Yay Camp is launching its first ever camp for aspiring activist adults. Check it out. You might want to be there. And it's going to be held the week of the 4th of July at Woodstock Farm Sanctuary. And yeah, grown-ups. Sounds amazing, right? So that'll be an exciting interview. And then, of course, we'll have news. We'll have Rising Anxieties. Our bonus content for this week is some really great extra time that I got to spend with Persis Eskander, where she talks about, among other things, the origin of her amazing name. I just love her name. I say that frequently throughout the program. And how her childhood growing up in Australia started her on this road to rethinking our relationships with wild animals. And if you're a member of the flock, you'll get an email on the Tuesday after this podcast goes up with a link, or you can find it on the flock Facebook page. And if you're not a member of the flock, please consider joining, because these bonus interviews are terrific and we can really use the help. And that'll be $10 a month at ourhenhouse.org/donate. And so now we have a jam-packed show, so let's get right to the interview with Persis. She is a longtime advocate for all sentient beings, not just animals, all of them. She started out looking at societal structures underlying suffering. And that was kind of when she began her career working in human rights research and policy in South Africa, in the UK, and in Australia. But then she realized that the way we treat animals causes such an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering, and her focus shifted to anti-speciesism advocacy. She's now the executive director of the Wild Animal Suffering Research Project, and she's been doing research on wild animal suffering for a little under 2 years and has uncovered some just really fascinating stuff. Welcome to Our Hen House, Persis.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here, for one reason, because you have like the best name I've ever heard. And for another reason, because the stuff you're talking about is kind of mind-blowing. And I've been doing this for a while, and I've talked to a lot of people about a lot of different issues, but your work is taking things to a different level. So just, why don't we start off by just explaining what is the basic premise of your work and the nature of wild animal suffering?
Yeah, sure. So wild animal suffering it's really a very simple concept. A lot of people have this idea that if we don't interfere in the lives of wild animals or their habitats, then they have these really peaceful and enjoyable lives. So basically, if we care about animals, then we shouldn't interfere in their lives. The problem is that for most animals, it's not actually true that they have these very joyful lives. In fact, for most of them, it's very likely that the opposite is true. So the reason for that is because the driver of our existence, so like genetic evolution, doesn't optimize for happiness. Instead, it optimizes for fitness and strength. So that means that in a healthy ecosystem or in a thriving environment, the very strongest animals will survive and adapt. And any animals who fail to really meet that bar, so older animals or injured animals or animals with diseases or overrun with parasites, they don't get taken care of by the environment. They end up suffering and then they die. So that's really the core concept of a wild animal suffering. The reason we think it's important is that if someone, and regardless of who that is, if it's a human or a dog or a cow or a lizard, is starving to death, it doesn't make a difference to that individual what has caused their suffering. It doesn't matter that we caused it or that it's caused by natural processes. They suffer either way. And I think it's not unusual to want to help in either situation. And actually, we do this quite a lot already. We just do it on a really small scale. So for most of us, if we see an animal that's been hit on the side of the road by a car, or if a hungry squirrel comes into our yard or a bird with a broken wing, lands on our balcony, most of us would do what we can to save that animal. And I think the only difference between those examples and what we do is that we're working on a much larger scale.
I want to get into a lot of specifics of this because it opens up so many questions about what our role in the world. I mean, it's just the whole gamut of questions from the most fundamental, what are we doing here in the world, to very specifics about how should we carry this out. But let's start, when you say we, you're talking about the Wild Animal Suffering Research Project, is that right? And can you explain a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, sure. So we're a very small team. Essentially, we were born out of the effective altruism community. So this is a community that tries to think about the most effective way to help all beings. And so wild animal suffering kind of came about through the animal advocacy wing of that. And we work as part of the Effective Altruism Foundation. And the core focus of our work is to do research to try and understand more about this problem. It's extremely complex, as you can imagine. It deals with a lot of empirical questions that we currently don't have answers to. But there is a lot of information. It's just scattered across a lot of different academic disciplines. So we try to pull together that research. We ask ourselves what answers we think are most important at the moment. We try and bring together literature reviews to better understand the problem. And one of our core focuses this year and in the coming years is also to try and get more academic interest on this issue. So right now, there hasn't really been any discipline that focuses on the welfare of individual animals. We have disciplines that focus on the health of ecosystems and environments and on the conservation of species, but none of them look specifically at the quality of an individual animal's life and what we can or should even do to help them.
Yeah, it's kind of bringing this whole, the animal rights ethos of looking at the individual to the whole question of wild animals. I mean, I know that you have explained that there is enormous suffering in the wild, but of course we all know that there is also enormous suffering that we're actually participating in and causing. So why focus on this when there are still, I mean, like factory farming is still everywhere. Why? And it seems like it would be an easier. Shouldn't we do that first? Kind of mentality applied to that. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah. So I think there are two really important reasons why it matters that we work on this now. But before I get into those, I think it's also important to point out that when we talk about wanting to work on wild animal suffering, we're not talking about taking resources away from factory farming. So I consider factory farming to be an incredibly large scale and horrible issue. So the idea is not that we shift resources away from factory farming and focus on wild animal suffering, but that we grow the entire animal advocacy movement so that we bring more resources in to focus on both of these extremely large-scale issues. So the two reasons why I think this really matters, the first is that wild animal suffering, as you mentioned, happens on a huge scale. So for every human, there are approximately 10 animals in factory farms, and then there are about 1,000 to 100,000 wild vertebrates, and something like 100 million to a billion bugs, which include insects, spiders, earthworms, basically terrestrial invertebrates. And so there are approximately, trillions of vertebrates, and I think it's something like quintillions of invertebrates. And when we think about the scale of that problem, we need to ask ourselves two questions. So the first one is, well, are all these animals sentient? So when we talk about the quintillions of invertebrates, I mean, do we think insects are sentient and can feel pain? And do they all suffer equally? So is it plausible that a cow suffers as much as a chicken, which suffers as much as a fish? Or is it possible that there are gradients? And for example, one animal is capable of suffering more. So do humans suffer more than a cow, for example? I think it's definitely possible that that's the case, but we don't really know for sure. And we also don't know how probable it is. There's so much we don't understand about the capacity of animals to feel pain and what their experience of pain is like, because it's very subjective and we really only understand it in ourselves. So these are really like complex questions. But what we want to do is think about, well, what is the probability that they can feel pain? That all of these animals feel pain? And then based on that probability, how important is it that we address this issue? And I think most people, when they think about the number of wild animals, would conclude that the scale of the problem, even if, for example, smaller animals might not be as capable of feeling as much pain, it's still on a scale much larger than factory farming. And I think the second really important reason is that it's really neglected. So I agree that factory farming is also extremely neglected. But what I've been really heartened by is that there's this real growth in the animal advocacy movement. And I remember seeing a lot of media outlets in 2017 calling it, the year of veganism. And it's been so amazing in the last few years to see so many people working on ending factory farming for animals. What we don't yet see is a lot of people working on the suffering of wild animals. So for every person who either decides to give their time to the issue or decides to donate resources to the issue, they have an outsized impact relative to the impact they could have elsewhere because we have so few people focusing on it at the moment.
So that you've opened up just so many issues. There are so many issues to unpack here, but I think that the one I really need to get to is let's go back to that insect question. I mean, I think that everybody listening to this podcast probably really, really, really hopes they're not sentient because the world is just so much worse if they are. But and you pointed out that we don't know enough, but what do we know? And will we ever know enough? Is that a question that we will be able to settle? And how far along are we to settling it? Both whether they're sentient and, as you pointed out, we might be talking about levels of sentience here. How much can we know?
So right now, unfortunately, there is so little that we do know. I don't think these questions are unanswerable. I don't think the knowledge it's not unknowable to us. The issue we have is that there's not really a universal metric for how to there's no clear marker between something that is sentient and not sentient. And even if you try and conceive of sentience along a spectrum, it's very hard to tell at what point, one animal is more sentient than another. I think there are some, there are two commonly understood necessary conditions of sentience. One is having a central nervous system, and the other is demonstrating nociceptive behavior, which is avoidance behavior. So, for example, if you injure an animal, then it demonstrates that it is injured. It either cares for the injured body part, or it sort of slows down and demonstrates ways that it's not fit. Or, for example, if you place something harmful in front of an animal, it will move away from it. So there are some invertebrates. Well, most invertebrates fulfill the first category, the central nervous system. and some fulfill the second, but not all. So there are cases where insects do demonstrate avoidance behavior, and there are cases where they don't really seem to be bothered when something destructive is happening to their body. What the problem is that those aren't sufficient to say that an insect is or isn't sentient. And I think if we can't say that they do feel pain, then we can't really conclude that they don't feel pain either. And that seems kind of like a trivial point, but as you mentioned, because the number of individual invertebrates alive is so enormous, when we think about like the aggregate amount of pain, and even if the amount of pain that they feel is extremely small relative, say, to our capacity for pain, it ends up being an amount of suffering that occurs on like an astronomical scale. And so one thing we want to do is not neglect it anymore. One thing we want to do is try and place more of an emphasis on studying this further. And that might mean providing funding opportunities in academia for scientists in neurobiology or in animal cognition or in ethology who have already started exploring this or who have touched on this in the past, and trying to get more experts working on the field so that we can start coming up with some, I guess, more concrete information to help guide any action we might want to take.
Yeah, obviously information is needed first, but then the obvious goal would be action. And assuming that the information does come out that they are sentient at some level, and what are the interventions that could, I mean, we're not talking about veganism here. I don't think that, like a lot of vegans, myself included, like to think that they're living lightly on the world, even when it comes to insects. But let's face it, none of us are. If we're eating food, what kind of interventions could you imagine if it turns out this is something we have to take into account, and we want to cause as little harm as possible?
So it's really difficult to talk about specific action we can take at the moment because it is such a complex problem, and because there's so much we don't understand about potential long-term effects on the ecosystem. I think, for example, things that we can do is modify our behavior when we already interact with animals. So, for example, in industrial agriculture, we often use massive amounts of pesticides and insecticides. It's not really obvious that those are the optimal way to reduce insect populations that damage crop, nor is it clear to us whether they're the most humane thing to do. So one way is to better understand insect physiology and use what Brian Tomasic, who is very involved in wild animal suffering, has termed humane insecticides. So those might be insecticides that either kill very rapidly or kill painlessly. And in that sense, we have this really promising solution that doesn't really harm or reduce any economic gain, but also make sure that when we're talking about potentially sentient animals living in enormous numbers, we're doing what we can to sort of minimize the suffering that we might inflict on them or in any way that we interfere with them.
Yeah, that actually, I mean, now that you've said it, that actually seems like a very, very reasonable thing to support, and it doesn't seem particularly difficult. But I don't want to spend the whole time there. I think I could talk about this all day, but I don't want to spend the whole time I have you here talking about insects, because you're talking about the entire wild animal kingdom. And I've been thinking about this book that Jonathan Balcombe wrote a few years ago, The Pleasurable Kingdom. And in it, he contended that people often overlook the amount of pleasure and joy wild animals seem to experience. And do you discount that point of view, or just feel, moving on from the invertebrates and talking about the animals we more commonly think of, the birds and wild animals, do you discount that there's pleasure and joy in their lives, or do you just feel that it's not the full picture, or what?
So I definitely wouldn't say I discount the joy and pleasure in their lives. It's certainly the case that every animal experiences some joy and pleasure in their life, usually when they're sort of fulfilling their needs. So when they're eating or when they're mating, those are experiences that are full of happiness for animals. I think one of the biggest issues that we face is in trying to understand how much happiness they experience versus how much suffering. And then also trying to understand the degree of happiness versus the degree of suffering. For a lot of animals, especially animals that breed quite extensively, so animals that tend to be what is known as R strategists, so that means they reproduce in large numbers and invest very little effort into rearing those animals. Those sorts of species, to maintain population consistency over the long run, don't really need to see more than the same number of infants as parents replacing them on average every season. But they have huge amounts of children. So, every mice might have sort of 6 or 7 offspring in a season, and it might reproduce over, 3 or 4 different seasons. Most of these animals, most of these infants, because they aren't cared for, don't live very long in their lives. They might die of starvation, they might be prey, they might be just too weak to compete with other animals, there might not be enough food, or they might be too slow and get left behind. These are the sorts of animals that I think live much unhappier lives than happier lives, because they live such short durations, and most of their life is a struggle until they die. And then if we think about the fact that the most numerous animals are strategists, so the most numerous animals employ this strategy of having a lot of offspring and not really investing any energy into caring for them, then we kind of come to this conclusion that a lot of animals that are born, live in suffering, and then die. And so that's something that kind of leans you towards the idea that there might be more suffering than happiness, although it's certainly not, empirically conclusive at this point. It's something that seems plausible, but we definitely need to look into it further to sort of understand the differences between happiness and suffering for animals' lives.
Yeah, there are many, many unanswered questions here. I know this is an issue that when I read the article that you wrote on the Animal Charity Evaluators website, which was fascinating. You talked a lot about that people tend to back off from this issue and just say, well, that's nature. And I have to say, I do the same thing. Like, when you're an animal activist, there's a lot of suffering and a lot of problems. And to take this on seems just impossible. But you do take it on. So how do you respond to that? I mean, this is just nature. How are we going to fix it? Like, is it really within our realm to fix it? Can we even think about doing that? How do you respond to those kinds of attitudes towards this work? It definitely is a huge problem, and I find it daunting as well. I don't come into work every day thinking, this is something I'm going to resolve in a couple of years. I think it's something we have to plan for the long term. This isn't like we're not going to find a solution to our animal suffering in the next 5 years. It's hard to think about the idea of intervening in nature on such a massive scale. But I think one thing that can help, I guess, bridge that inferential distance that maybe people have is that we often interfere in nature for our own ends. We actually do it all the time. We convert land for urban development. We build cities. We engage in mining. We've turned large plots of land into industrial agriculture. We're constantly interfering in the environment. And so I think it's not the case that we can't do something. It's more the case that we don't yet know how to do something that will end up being positive in the long run. And we don't want to be hasty about intervening now. So it's a large problem that requires a lot of research at this point, so that one day in the future, we are confident that the action we do take ends up being beneficial for animals, for humans, and for the ecosystem as well. When you focus on things that you want to do, and obviously you're not even close to being able to do that, as you pointed out. But why even think about starting anywhere other than human-caused suffering to wild animals? I mean, I'm thinking specifically of climate change, but of course humans cause suffering to wild animals in so many different areas, enormous problems for wild animals. Why would that not just be the logical place to start about thinking about interventions?
Oh, but it is the logical place to start.
Oh, okay.
And I agree with you. So I think we arrived at the same conclusion. So when we talk about wild animal suffering, we're not purely talking about their experiences that that we don't have any role in. We're also talking about the ways that we indirectly harm their lives. So climate change is an example of ways that we've indirectly made the lives of animals possibly much more difficult. So severe weather events or weather fluctuations might expose animals. They lose their habitats and then they might die of exposure or starvation. When we have sort of an El Nino event and droughts for a number of years, then animals end up dying on massive scales. And I mean, that's just one example of a way that we interfere. Another way, for example, is in agriculture. We invest a lot of resources into pest control of vertebrates and invertebrates. So we kill voles and mice and frogs and birds to try and make sure that farmers don't lose crops and then lose the economic gains that they require. So there are lots of ways that we currently do harm animals indirectly, and we want to start by thinking about how we can improve those existing activities that we take, and what we can do to minimize or even end that kind of suffering before we go on to the problems where we really have no involvement.
What are some, I know people have proposed types of interventions, and not just in stopping human messing with wildlife, but various ways that people have proposed to help reduce the suffering of wild animals. Can you talk a little bit about things that have been proposed, like we've been talking a little bit in generalities, getting into specific, whether it's small scale or large scale. What kind of things are people thinking about?
So I think a couple of ideas that have been suggested. So humane insecticides is one idea that's been suggested. Another one that I wrote about in a population control paper is thinking about using alternative pest management techniques. So my first sort of foray into wild animal suffering was to look at practices in pest control, because for vertebrates and invertebrates, we, even outside of agriculture, just general pest control of overabundant or invasive species kills in the tens of millions of animals. So looking at like humane ways that we might want to change our culling practices. So for example, rather than killing invasive or overabundant species, let's think about ways that we can regulate their population growth. One really promising option there is gene drives. So gene drives basically involve the mutation of genes in a species that promotes sterilization or acts as a contraceptive. And that eventually reduces the population. So if it spreads into the wild population, year on year, their population rate reduces, and they end up either crashing or they end up reverting back to a carrying capacity that is sustainable with the environment that they live in. Something that has been done in the past, but not necessarily for the welfare of wild animals, is vaccinating foxes. So when there was a rabies outbreak in Europe, the solution that ended up working, funnily enough, was vaccinating foxes rather than culling foxes. And that ended up eliminating rabies in the European population of foxes, as well as the incidences of rabies in humans. So there are lots of there are interesting methods out there that are currently either being run on a small scale or being trialed to be released on a larger scale. And the ones that I think are really promising are things like contraceptives, vaccinations, and alternative ways to reduce population growth.
Yeah, those all sound scary, because anytime we mess with nature, it's a little scary, but really, really sensible. But I've also heard things brooded about, like just in conversations about animal rights, or whatever, of like changing predation, making it so that predators don't prey on other animals. I mean, that's really messing with the whole concept. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think they're controversial ideas. I'm not sure they're the sorts of ideas that are ever going to become actionable as policy. I think the question of whether to what extent we want to interfere in nature depends on how much you kind of value nature for itself. So do you believe there is an intrinsic value to the environment and to natural processes, or do they only have an instrumental value? And I think that's where people's intuitions kind of differ, and why some people might promote the idea that we should be, genetically reprogramming predators, and others would say, well, no, we can't interfere because nature has this intrinsic value. I think regardless of where you land, you have to keep in mind or think very hard about the extent to which you value nature versus the moral importance of individual animals. So ideally, there is a solution that requires very minimal interference in the environment, and that promotes the well-being of all animals. But if their only solution open to us is one where we might have to intervene quite drastically with the environment, but it won't necessarily have negative effects on our existence or our health or the health and existence of other sentient beings, then we face a really difficult decision where we say, well, do we value their well-being more than natural processes, or do we value natural processes more than the happiness of individuals that can suffer?
Yeah, I really think that it's so fascinating, because ultimately, when you start thinking about this, it does come down to this very fundamental question of our role in the world. And even though we are so far from, I mean, as you pointed out, we don't even have the knowledge that we need to even think about these issues in any kind of serious way, as carrying them out practically. I mean, we would have to know a lot more before we could do anything like this without messing it up. But your mind does go there. Like, what if we did have that knowledge? And I'm not sure I want to use the word spiritual, but how does thinking about this affect your view of the world, and what it is that we're all doing here, and what we should do with our lives and with this moment we have on Earth? Do you think of it in those terms?
Sometimes I do. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, we live such short lives, relative to the length of the Earth's life and the existence of the universe. We have such a minute amount of time on Earth. I think for me, the most important thing is that what I do with my life benefits living beings in some way. It seems kind of a waste to just live my life and not really make a difference or not really have a positive impact. So I kind of think that one of the best things we can be doing is learning as much as we can about the world that we live in, understanding why things happen the way they do, and then figuring out if there's a way we can actually improve them. So I don't necessarily believe that there is some, destiny for all of us, or that there is some rule behind anything that happens, or the reason things happen. I actually don't think there is a reason that things tend to happen. I think it's all kind of arbitrary. And so we need to make sense of that, and we need to decide for ourselves what matters and work hard to make sure that we make a difference in whatever it is that we value.
Yeah, well said. And I feel this, it kind of doesn't matter whether there's a big plan or whether it's all just like random. We have no idea what we're doing here. The solution is still the same. I really like the way you put that. Of our goal while we're here is just to, I'm not going to try to quote you because I don't have the right words, but I really did like the way you put it. This has been a fascinating conversation. I mean, there's so much to unpack here. And the fact is that as you pointed out, we're only beginning to think about having the amount of knowledge we would have to have in order to make really major interventions. But there are interventions that we could be making right now that would save a lot of suffering. And you've talked a little bit about some of the systemic ones, like humane pesticides. But can you just, for our listeners, talk a little bit about what we can individually do to promote the well-being of wild animals?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing we can do is start talking about it with our peers. I mean, animal rights advocates are possibly one of the best and most receptive audiences because they've already come to the point where they, accept the sentience of non-humans, and they value that and they care about the well-being of other animals. And so I think trying to encourage our peers to think beyond factory farm animals or sort of the traditional animal rights sphere into the harms that are caused to animals that either we cause indirectly or that we don't have any role in, but the fact that suffering still exists means it should still matter to us. So definitely raising awareness amongst our peers and talking about it and learning more about the issue. It's kind of an unusual topic. And so one important thing in raising awareness is also finding ways to talk about it that isn't very confrontational or contrarian. A lot of people, I think, feel very intuitively that nature is good and we shouldn't interfere. And there are ways to have the conversation that mean that they can accept both that nature is valuable and that the lives of wild animals are also valuable. Another is that people with a really strong background in science, so in ecology or ethology or animal welfare science or veterinary medicine, these are all people with really excellent backgrounds who can do research. So either students, undergrad or masters or postdocs, can start incorporating these considerations in the research that they do. That would be incredibly useful. And then also supporting interventions that eventually start to come out as recommendations. So, for example, policies to introduce more humane ways to reduce invasive populations or more humane ways to treat animals in crop cultivation or more humane ways to treat animals in national parks and reserves. So keeping an eye out for these sorts of issues when they're discussed at a political level and finding ways to support options that benefit animals.
Yeah, those are all. It does turn out that there's stuff that we can each do to promote this idea, and I think that one of the things we all have to get over is just we want to think of the world as a good place. I mean, you pointed out we want to think of nature as a good, and we want to think of the world as fixable, but the world you speak of has suffering that is endemic and horrific and inevitable, and maybe we just have to face that. But I love the idea that we're here to reduce it to the level that we can, and that's what we all hope to be doing. I've really gotten so much from this conversation with you, Persis. It's really a fascinating topic. Thanks so much for joining us today.
No worries. I'm really glad I could talk about it with you. Thanks.
This week's dedication comes from listener and supporter Ryan Alexander, who would like to dedicate this episode to their passion project, No Meat May. No Meat May challenges people to eliminate meat from their diets for 31 days, inspiring 94% of participants to reduce or eliminate meat after taking part. No Meat May is a great vehicle for those veg-curious friends and family ready to take their first bold step toward vegan. Challenge someone you know to start their personal revolution this May at nomeatmay.net. That's NOMEATMAY.net. Now let's get into the news. Our first story is a horrifying one, but also one of incredible courage. All right, this is from The Independent in the UK paper. Australian sheep bound for the Middle East, quote, cooked alive in harrowing and deadly conditions, unquote, on live export ships. And of course, we've heard of the horrible conditions in which sheep are shipped after their wool production is over, are shipped from Australia to the Middle East, generally to the Middle East, where mutton is a popular food, and shipped in horrifying conditions, and then slaughtered, because slaughtered for halal slaughter without being stunned, right on the docks. I mean, the whole thing has been a scandal for years, and apparently nothing has been done about it, and it's even worse than we had imagined. And the conditions on this ship, it was one ship, though it was more than one voyage, are just have shocked Australia, though why the people should be shocked when this has been talked about so many times before. But the key is here that somebody was actually on this ship taking this film. It's incredible courage of this undercover operative for Animals Australia, who apparently took 5 voyages in this horrifying conditions, and has really caused quite a stir in Australia. And there has been an outcry. The footage was actually on Australian television. People are outraged. There's renewed calls for a ban on live exports. Though, to tell you the truth, I don't know. I guess they would kill the sheep in Australia and ship the meat. That would be the solution to avoiding live shipment, because I doubt they're planning on getting rid of the wool industry. Terrible, terrible stuff, and real courage for bringing so much attention to it. All these Australian politicians are speaking out angrily. So let's see if something will happen. Another story of courage. This one, really, courage met with horrifying response. 6 park rangers killed in ambush in DRC's famed Virunga Gorilla Park. And this is from the Telegraph in the UK. And the Virunga is, of course, I mean, there's a movie about Virunga. It's a very famous area. It is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's a very dangerous area. And these wildlife rangers really risk their lives to care for these, the mountain gorillas. And it's not, they're most famous for their mountain gorillas, which of course is an incredibly endangered species, but there are also many other endangered species in this area. And these rangers take their lives in their hands, and they seem to know which militia group was probably guilty of this ambush in which these 5 men were killed. And there's the reasons. I mean, the reasons aren't simply that they want to go in and get gorillas, but there's just a terrible unrest in this province of Congo, and there are dozens of armed groups preying on the local population, trying to get control of the wealth that remains in that country, and they also it's possible that they poach animals in the park for bushmeat. I'm not sure. There's no indication in this article exactly the motives for this particular killing, but apparently, frequently, there don't have to be particularly good motives. It's just a very, very dangerous area. All right, our next story. All right, enough of the horrifying news. This is from Plant-Based News. Vegan cheese back on menu permanently at Domino's Pizza in Australia. Lucky people in Australia. Bad story from Australia. Great story from Australia. Why do we not have this in the U.S.? Apparently, they introduced vegan cheese. They're using Follow Your Heart vegan cheese. It was so popular that it sold out. Across Australia, everywhere, major demand caused a mass sellout. They had to regroup and increase their orders of the cheese, and it's now back, and they say it's permanent. All right, come to the U.S. Come on, this is ridiculous. All right, speaking of the U.S. and food, this is my final story is a U.S. Food story. Get ready for quote unquote bleeding veggie sliders at White Castle. This is from Grub Street. This is really amazing. And I know that not everybody considers the Impossible Burger to be vegan because it involved animal testing, and that's a perfectly fine position. But regardless, I think it's big news that Impossible Foods burgers are going to be in White Castle. White Castle. I mean, they're trying to show that this food is mainstream. You don't get more mainstream than White Castle. I used to love those little burgers, I have to admit. I'm ashamed of myself, but I can't help it. So they're going to be selling Impossible sliders, only at a handful of White Castles so far. 140 locations in New York and New Jersey, and some in Chicago. And it's going to be $1.99, and comes on the same little square bun that White Castle burgers come on, and has the same pickles and onions. Well, it says here smoked cheddar. I hope you can get it without the smoked cheddar. I just noticed that as I'm looking. I had read this article before, but I missed I avoided reading that part. So hopefully you can get it without the cheddar, and hopefully everything else is vegan. And the demand for Impossible Foods is growing so great. They just recently opened up a high volume plant in Oakland, and they're going to have to now double production. So they're doing great, and I love the fact that they are heading straight into the wild and crazy world of fast food, and so got to be great news. And that's it for this week's news. Yay Camp is hiring. Whether you already knew about Yay Camp or whether you're just learning about it on this episode, you now know that it is a social justice summer camp that serves all vegan food and runs life-changing week-long overnight camps on the East and West Coast for teens and starting this summer for adults. And they have some positions they're still hiring for folks to be counselors and workshop leaders, vegan chefs, a camp nurse. So this is really a dream job for the right person. To find out more, go to yaycamp.org. That's YEACAMP.org. Our second interview this week with Jasmine is with Nora Kramer, as I mentioned earlier, and she's been on the podcast before talking about Yay Camp, which she founded, Youth Empowered Action Camp. And it's such an amazing idea. Well, not just an idea, something she has made real. A social justice leadership camp. It serves all vegan food. It trains young activists. It's been doing it for 10 years, not just in animal rights activism, in all sorts of different kinds of activism. And Nora herself is an experienced activist and an experienced animal activist, and now she's bringing it to adults. It's just such a great concept. Yay Camp is going to be having its first ever camp for aspiring activist adults, and it's being held 4th of July weekend. Excellent timing. And at Woodstock Farm Sanctuary. Such an amazing idea. You're going to love listening to this conversation between Jasmine and Nora.
Welcome back to our hen house, Nora.
Thank you so much for having me, Jasmine.
I'm so excited. I'm always a fan of the work you're doing with Yay Camp and all of the many ways you're changing the world for animals. But today's topic is something I'm even more excited as if that were possible. Tell our listeners what Yay Camp is.
Sure. Well, Yay Camp is a social justice leadership summer camp for youth 12 to 17 who want to change the world. This is our 10th summer of running Yay Camp, and we run week-long overnight camps, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, but we've had kids from a dozen countries and more than half of the U.S. states who come all the way to join us because we're a pretty unique program. The real point of what we do is to help young people become activists on causes that they care about. And all of our food at all of our camps, of course, is vegan, because how could we run a social justice program and not have our food be vegan? We feel like that would be really hypocritical. So so this is our 10th year of running these camps, and I can't believe it.
I had no idea. 10 years. Wow. And things have really changed in the world in like the last 10 years, let alone the last 10 minutes. Right. I mean, how, well, let's just say we're recording this interview in the wake of the Parkland shooting and the March for Our Lives. And of course, that is just a drop in the bucket of the problems going on in terms of violence against children. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are and how that might affect your efforts at Yay Camp.
Yeah, it's been such an inspiration to see youth front and center, not just taking on leadership, but also getting the attention for it. There has, of course, been a lot written about, I think very accurately, about the privilege of the youth in Parkland and why they've been getting more attention than folks in Chicago and other areas who've been doing activism. And I think that's, really important to recognize. But this is an incredible moment when people are really paying attention to youth voices. I think, one of my main kind of takes on this is that youth are doing activism. I mean, if you go to any major big high school in the country, or around the country, you're going to see youth doing tons of activism. There's gay straight alliances at every major high school. There's environmental clubs. There might be a vegetarian or animal rights club. There's, so many different causes that are being represented around the country through youth activism that doesn't really make the news. We've had campers who are getting vegetarian options in their cafeteria, or getting rid of the styrofoam trays, or who are doing, body positivity programs at their school and anti-bullying initiatives. I mean, there's just so much activism that is happening that isn't the type that makes the news. And I think this is a really, this generation is way more, because of the internet, is way more aware of what's going on than I was, 25 years ago when I was their age. And it's also a politically way more progressive, minded generation, especially as, schools were integrated not that long ago. And so I think young people, there's a lot more diversity, there's a lot more awareness of different experiences, and I think we're going to keep seeing young people, really exert their power. And certainly as they get their voting rights, that's going to be something that hopefully will really shift the balance in this country.
Can you tell me how Yay Camp intersects with everything you're saying with the activism going on in schools? Like, you just mentioned all of these incredible clubs and activities that are going on at high schools throughout the country. So where does Yay Camp come in supporting those efforts?
So one of the main forms of activism that we encourage our campers to do is to do activism at their school, just locally. Schools make for a really great environment and community for activism, because you've got, built-in group of people that you can reach, both to activate and mobilize and to educate. So we work a lot with our campers to encourage them. We do a workshop at camp on starting and running an effective school club. And we do a lot with them to try to help them, get other people involved, and really to have clear goals of why they're doing what they're doing and why to get other people involved in their club. And we also do a lot to support them throughout the year. We have regular monthly video calls, and we've got active, Facebook groups and, other ways that we are in touch with our campers throughout the year. The next step for us in our evolution as an organization is to try to be able to provide more resources and really support young people and really people who haven't gone to Yay Camp, to have more of an online presence and online resources and other ways that we can help folks who are not already part of our community and network.
I appreciate the accountability that you're helping these kids to have with themselves and with each other. And I know from talking to you in the past that a lot of these kids just come into somehow and they don't quite know how yet. And so one of the things I appreciate about Yay Camp is that you have all of these different tracks.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting because we have such a diversity of youth who come to the camp. We've got, we'll have kids who are kind of prodigies who have started a nonprofit when they were 9 years old. And you're like, oh my God, this kid should be on the front page of every paper, kind of a Emma Gonzalez kind of household name kind of person. And then we have youth who are I know that I want to do something to help animals or the environment or speak up on, LGBT issues or racism or whatever, but I'm not really sure what. And it's amazing to bring those folks together. And that's actually the majority of our youth are people who've done a little bit, but aren't really sure how to take what they're doing to the next level. And I think, when they get to camp, we really are not trying to push anybody towards a certain cause or towards a certain type of activism. I feel like activism is hard enough when you already know exactly what you want to do and like how you want to do it. It's still, when you're a busy person, you've got a lot going on, and it is kind of swimming against the stream to do activism. So we want to make it as easy as possible for people by helping them find the cause that they're most passionate about and the ways that they feel most inspired to make a difference, so that when they go home, they are clear that this is what they want to do. And of course, they can change their mind. And I've changed my activist path. I know you've changed your activist path over the years, and that's, a sign of maturation, really.
Well, totally. And I think that the key is to keep people, young people, old people, middle people involved and engaged in social issues.
Like I said, for our campers, we do a lot to stay in touch with them during the year and try to really encourage them to keep going. I think of, I've been thinking more and more of activism as kind of like building a muscle, like almost like exercising. Like if you think about exercise, if you are somebody who's kind of been a bit of a couch potato and you know that you want to get healthier, it's kind of hard to get off the couch if you haven't been doing it in a while. You don't have a routine. You might be like, well, I don't really like running. I don't know what gym to go to. I don't really like the gym. How, when am I going to fit this in my day? And, that's something that is kind of hard to get going. And I think activism is kind of like that. It's like if you haven't really been doing this for a while, like where do you even plug in? Like what kind of activism do you do? Like what are you focusing on? Like when do you fit that in your schedule? Like how do you answer the questions that people might have, and all of those things. So we try as much as possible to really make it as easy as possible to help get people started, and then to be there for them when they get stuck, because we all get stuck. And one of the key things that we do at the camp is develop a really strong community where people have other folks around the country who care as much as they do. And so that they know that they're not alone. They're not, have a workout buddy. They have, an accountability buddy, or have someone around the country who cares as much as they do. And of course, they have our staff too, and me. I am in touch with campers all the time about their projects. So we try to really get them off the couch, get them going, and then be there for them when they get stuck. And a lot of them will message us when they're like, oh, we had our first club meeting, but like only 3 people showed up. It's like, that's exactly what we want to be there to help them with. Like, how do we get more people? And that's great that you had 3 people. How do you get those people to come back? And what are you wanting those 3 people to do? And, all of that.
One thing that I'm so excited about that, as soon as I found this out, I was like, get Nora now, is that Yay Camp is starting an adult camp for the first time this year. So tell me all about every aspect of this and what drew you to that.
So I am super excited about this. So people have been saying for years, I wish Yay Camp had been around when I was a kid, or, kind of joking that like, I'm just a little bit over 17. Like, are you sure I can't come? Like, wanting the camp to be available for people who are over who are adult. And over the years, something I've thought about doing for a long time, because, most of us didn't get any real training. I know I didn't, I over the years, I've been doing activism for almost 20 years now, and I've pursued every form of training I could find, but there's not really that much, and there's nothing that I've found out there like what Yay Camp provides. So this is a week-long overnight experience that I think of it as kind of bringing together the best of a conference with a leadership activism training, with the silliness and heartwarming goofiness of a summer camp, and like a rejuvenating kind of self-care oriented retreat. So it's a week-long experience at Woodstock Farm Sanctuary. We really couldn't think of a better location for it. So we're going to get to spend some time with the animals. Woodstock Farm Sanctuary is actually held at a former summer camp. Some of your listeners might know that they moved a few years ago, and their property that they purchased outside New Paltz is a former church camp. So we've actually been holding our youth camps there for the past 3 years. So we know the space. It's a great space for a summer camp. And so throughout the week, so it's the week of 4th of July. So it's July 1st to the 7th. And so we picked those dates so that, we hope that people, if you work, can take off, time from work. It'll be easier that week over 4th of July. And it's actually would only be 4 weekdays because 4th of July is on a Wednesday. So it's Sunday through Saturday. All of our camps, our curriculum is focused on developing 4 core areas that I feel like really make the difference for somebody who is, just getting started or wants to take what they're doing to the next level. So our adult camp is going to be the same. So we focus on building knowledge, so knowledge about problems and about solutions, skills, so that you can kind of figure out, what are you going to do about these problems that you care about, confidence, so that you believe in yourself and really believe in the process, or believe in that somebody can actually make a difference. And 4th is community, so that you know that you're not alone. You have other people that you can connect with. You know that there are organizations that you can work with or reach out to. And so that you really don't, you never feel unsupported or like you're kind of floating in the wind. So our curriculum and our camp is going to be very similar for the adults as it is for the youth. Obviously, we're going to make some key changes and, have everything be age appropriate. There's not going to be bedtime in the same way that there will be for the campers.
I would like that. I think it would be so nice if someone was like, it's 10 o'clock.
Well, we'll definitely encourage people to get good sleep. And, it is a substance-free experience. So it's not like a big, we're not like partying in that kind of sense. We want people to be well rested and be able to, focus on what we're doing and be rejuvenated. And, if people want to like stay up a little later, having a little pajama party, then, we're not going to tell them no.
Is that what the kids are calling it these days? I got it.
That's what I don't know if they are.
Okay,
actually.
I got
That's
it.
what I'm calling it.
No, well, I mean, it sounds like dreamy. It sounds completely amazing. And, I know that like if the number one question I get if I'm giving a workshop is, well, what do I do? Like, how do I do it? And what do I do? And how can I take this like passion for animal rights or for insert the blank cause here and actually turn it into action. Yeah. And that's then and is just so important and valuable because you're not just focusing on animal rights, right? It's a variety of tracks as well for the grown-ups.
Yeah. So the way that all of our programs are set up is that, like I mentioned, we focus on building knowledge, skills, confidence, and community, and those are relevant no matter what cause you care about. So I'll say that we definitely believe in the interconnectedness of issues, and we do a whole workshop on how different issues are interconnected. That you can't just care about animals and not care about people. People are animals. And not to mention, you lose all credibility when you care about chickens, but you don't care about people getting killed by police, And so from an activist standpoint, I think it's strategic as well as in integrity and ethical to care about more than one issue. So we do recognize the interconnection of different issues, and you can't really leave Yay Camp only, being single issue. At the same time, just caring about animal rights or farm animals, that's a big enough issue already. I've devoted most of my career for 20 years almost just to that issue. And there's huge progress being made, but it's still a monumental, cause when you think about making a difference on it. So if you think about that you want to make a difference on 20 different issues, it's like, can be super overwhelming and hard to really kind of have your finger on the pulse of any one of them. So we do encourage people about halfway through to choose the issue that they want to focus primarily on. We call it your IOI, your issue of importance that you want to focus on. So for you, Jasmine, maybe it would be, veganism and farm animal, issues. But I know you're also really passionate about other issues around body image, LGBT issues, human rights issues. And as we all should be, recognizing that there's, so many different issues that we care about as whole, complete people. But at the same time, you've focused, a bulk of your work on farm animal and vegan issues, as have I. And I think that, a lot of times leads to us being more successful if we can focus, at least for a while on one issue. So we ask people about halfway through to choose the IOI that they want to focus on.
Well, I love the way that you're approaching it, just, putting it all out on the table and then helping people to get the rest of their time there. Yeah, I came to the animal rights movement by way of the AIDS awareness movement. So I think just inherently, I experience it all as overlapping oppressions and overlapping liberations because of that early on experience. So I love that you're offering that kind of a interconnected viewpoint for your campers.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
What might a typical day look like for the Yay Camp for adults?
So, our sample schedule's on our website, so you can see kind of the, what time we wake up and, all of those kinds of things. But throughout the day, there are, we have a variety of different activities that we do that are, I think, split up in a really thoughtful way so that we're not delving too deeply into depressing topics, although there is, some of that as we're learning about the problems in our world. But those those workshops that are either building probably knowledge or skills are interspersed with silly games and fun outdoor time and community building activities. We'll have time each day to visit with the animals at Woodstock Farm Sanctuary. And each evening we do a whole camp activity or evening activity of the night. And those are typically either community building activities, like we do silly, we have like a dance party and a talent show, like things that are, straight out of summer camp.
You had me at talent show. Go on.
And we actually call it the Yay Show. We don't call it the talent show because it kind of has our own take. So like we've had campers who have done performances at the Yay Show that are, not at a typical, we wouldn't see at a typical talent show, that are focused on their cause. Like we had a camper one year who she was a returning camper, and she had worked the year before on getting getting herself scheduled to lead an assembly about her issue, which her IOI, which was human trafficking. And she had planned that it was going to be happening in the fall, and she wanted to practice the speech that she was going to give. So she practiced a chunk of that speech at our Yay Show. So we have somebody giving a speech about human trafficking, followed by, someone telling jokes or, singing. I think that, that's something that I love about, what we've created at Yay Camp is for a complete person. We do a couple of workshops on dealing with the heartbreak and the sadness of caring about what's happening in the world. Like, I don't know about you, but I've spent, quite a bit of time over the years just crying about what's happening in the world. I was sobbing on election night when I first started seeing what was happening to animals and watching videos. I would sob. And I think that has helped me so that I can, I've kind of expanded my heart so that I can be with the terrible things that are happening. And I haven't burnt out after all these years, and I do keep going. And so we try to, really address the whole person who is walking around, with a full heart of and feeling the emotions of what's happening in the world, and who also wants to be silly, and who also needs to visit with animals, and who wants to make friends, and who wants to sing songs, and who wants to figure out what the heck am I going to do about all of this. So we try to really, build our curriculum in a way that is a really holistic program, in a way that no conference is like that, and we do a lot to really to bring people together so that, it's really common for our campers to say, even I think probably every session we've had, 27 sessions of Yay Camp. And I've kept track. I started keeping track each time. By night 2, always we have somebody who says in our group activity, I feel closer to you guys than I do with my friends at home. And everyone's yes, always. We do so much to really help bring people together in a much deeper way than can ever happen at school. And, you can do that when you're creating a really safe environment. You're bringing people together who, are of a like commitment, if not a like mind on every, issue, and, doing certain activities that are designed to really bring people closer together. So it creates an environment where people, we say, feel comfortable going outside their comfort zone and really kind of reinventing who they are.
That's incredible. I love that. And I can see how just kind of coming of age in a way in your own activism through the safety and support and healthy challenge of Yay Camp for adults would foster that. So that's super cool. How has this whole process changed you doing it for 10 years?
Oh man. How much time do we have? The short version, I think it's really helped me find my activist niche and path. I was someone who I started doing activism. I went vegan in 1998, and I didn't know what activism was. My strategy to convince everyone to go vegan was just to yell at people or to make them feel guilty when they were eating meat, and that was all I could think to do.
Yeah, I think that's the same for a lot of people. We find out what's going on, and it's all we can think to do is scream.
I really didn't know what else to do, and it didn't work very well or at all, and just was pissing people off and had me feel more disconnected and confused. Why am I crazy? Does nobody else care about this basic? This seems so obvious to me. And so over the years, I decided I wanted to just try every type of activism I could think of to figure out, where do I fit in here and how can I make the biggest difference? And I've learned, so much of different ways that people can make a difference, how to, talk to difficult people, when to not talk to those people, how to make decisions about, what might be the most effective use of my time. I feel like I've just been stumbling along for a long time. And so I'm a few years ahead of people who are, kind of more closer to starting out. And I think throughout this process, I've started to really hone in on what are the things that are most important for people as they're becoming activists. And that's been really gratifying. For me, it's just been a huge inspiration to get to know some really incredible young people and to have people share that Yay Camp has made a huge difference for them. I can't even, my heart kind of explodes every summer and in a good way. And we've had campers who message me out of the blue who are like, I don't know if you remember me, went to Yay Camp 6 years ago. Just want to let you know I'm still vegan. I'm like, I didn't know you went vegetarian, let alone vegan. I haven't heard from you in all these years, which, some people stay very much close in touch and other people don't, which, is understandable. It happens. But, I've had kids, years later say, just want you to know I'm still doing this activism. And I'm like, that's amazing. So, and then other kids who I know are doing a lot of activism and who tell me that before Yay Camp, they weren't doing any activism. And I'm like, are you serious? I only know you as someone who's doing a lot, but they weren't before this. And so I think one of the biggest takeaways for me about that is, we just do this for a week. We're not doing anything, it's not magic. We just have put a lot of thought into how do we help people. And that I think, activism can be tough enough to get going on, that, when we create a supportive environment and really put some thought into how to help people, this, doing that for a week can really make a long-term difference.
Totally. And I think as a fellow longtime activist who also feels things deeply, maintaining a sense of actually humility and just, I think it's a sense of humility, a sense of humor, and the ebb and flow of how activism goes, how personal evolution goes. Because, we're not in this for 2 years. We're in this for hopefully 80. I'm sure that our listeners are ready to sign up. So how can they get involved?
Yeah, well, our website is yaycamp.org, and you can click on the button that says for adults, or just go to yaycamp.org/adult.
That's YEA.
Sorry, yes, YEACAMP.org, and that's would be where you'd go as an adult, or if you have kids, or if there's any teens listening to this, for the youth camp is the same site. And we do offer financial aid for folks who need that. That's really important to us, that we are accessible to folks who maybe are in the nonprofit sector, or who are students, or aren't able to afford the full price. So I don't want that to be the reason that someone can't come. And we it's a pretty simple process. Go to the website and sign up. We have lots of different information on the site, a bunch of FAQs if you have any. But if anybody has any specific questions, they can just message us through the website, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Wow, Nora, I think you need to come back after the summer, because I want to know every story.
Yeah, absolutely, I would love to.
It's really great. I'd love to chat, maybe even talk with some of the people who go, just do a little kind of smattering of interviews about what people are getting out of it, because I'm so excited about it, and I wish I could go. But anyway, so yeah, it's yaycamp.org or yaycamp.org/adults, and thanks for getting up and talking to me this morning, and thanks for all you're doing to change the world for animals.
Thank you so much for having me, Jasmine.
Please like us. Check us out on social media and follow, do whatever you need to do to keep us on your radar. On Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we're at Our Hen House, all one word. Also, you can find us online at ourhenhouse.org. And if you want to get in touch with us or have any questions, or if you have any quandaries you want us to discuss on the air, you can email us at info@ourhenhouse.org. Anxieties are rising. Our first article is from Meeting Place, Activists Going to Extremes Down Under. This is by Hannah Thompson, who writes the column Animal Ag Watch. And she's very concerned about this unbelievably great episode in Australia, where 60 animal rights activists locked themselves inside a hog barn just north of Brisbane, and some of them left voluntarily. 30 of them were inside for 9 hours before they were physically removed by the police. And according to local police, says Hannah, the actions are considered unlawful entry, but no charges have been filed. Well, we'll see what happens with that. I hope no charges are filed. But so she's very upset about this. This is just so awful. And among the things that are awful about it is that it might happen here in the United States, and with animal activist groups brazenly breaking into farms and stealing animals. Well, that's not what happened here, but, I can see that has happened, and sometimes facing no consequences for doing so. And, the stealing is frequently actually rescuing. That was me, not her. I unfortunately... Back to Hannah. I unfortunately think this is a tactic we will need to be preparing for. Actually, I agree with that. I do think that they should be preparing for it. She suggests that they get fencing, motion detectors, lighting, security cameras, locked gates at all entry points, locks at all facility doors. I think most of these outfits have these things. She wants them to contact the local police to find out what they should be doing. The police, of course, have nothing better to do than to advise animal agriculture. And as always, vigilance is key in guarding our industry from attacks. This wasn't actually an attack, if it was an effort to bring attention to. That's what they're really afraid of. All right, back to her. From attacks by extreme activists who want to see milk, meat, poultry, and eggs off our tables for good. Well, yeah. That's about it. She's right. I can't argue with her. Animal rights activists must rethink their rhetoric. This is from collegiatetimes.com by one Sally Dukes, an opinion columnist. I don't think she has anything to do with the industry. But she is upset about the way animal activists talk, and she thinks their cause is just dandy. However, I doubt that she's really on board, because these are the kinds of things she says. A lot of medicines and makeup are tested on animals. This seems cruel, and in some cases it can be, but these products need to be tested, and the only alternative would be to test them on people. In the first place, makeup doesn't need to be tested.